Revelator John.
Hello Revelators, welcome to Revelator John on YouTube. Today I'm talking more about weather theory and I'm going to explain what a cold front is. So a cold front or a front is always the boundary between two air masses. So a cold front is when a cold air mass is moving into or overtaking a warm air mass. So usually a cold air mass is associated with a high pressure system and a warm air mass is associated with a lower pressure air system. So when the cold air mass, because of the pressure differential, high to low, moves in and overtakes the warm air mass, that point, the boundary, is called the front. And this is the cold front because the cold is moving forward. And what happens is that the cold air rides along the surface of the ground, around the terrain, essentially. And the warm, moist air ahead of it is pushed up. Now, depending on how cold the cold air mass is, how fast it's moving based upon the pressure differential will determine the severity of the weather. But in classic cold front weather, you will have a lot of vertical movement of that hot air, or that warm air ahead of it, which will cause condensation at various altitudes. So that will cause lots of cloud formation, lots of cumulus clouds, maybe cumulus nimbus clouds, maybe even thunderstorms. In the worst case, squalls, frontal squalls. You'll have embedded thunderstorms, thunder, lightning, hail, that kind of thing ahead of as the cold front moves through. With that, you'll have associated very large water droplets when it actually does rain, and it'll be torrential rain as well. Okay, so that's in its worst case scenario. So the worst, stormiest weather you can consider, that will be a cold front moving through. As the cold front moves through, what is left behind is clear weather, and this is classic cold front movement. As the cold front moves through, all the warm air ahead of it is propelled up into the atmosphere, creating this dynamic mix which causes some more severe weather. But as it all blows through, pardon the pun, as it all blows through, as it all moves away, then behind it is a lot more stable weather, clear skies usually, and clear blue skies potentially, and that is the high pressure system that has now replaced the low pressure system ahead of it. So that is what a cold front is. Now, I use this term with a word of caution, if you will. See, when we say a cold front, what we should really be talking about is a cold front in relative terms. The air behind the cold front, the air mass behind the cold front, is colder than the air ahead of the cold front, which is warmer. Doesn't necessarily mean that the air is warm or the air is really, really cold. Okay, it's just a relative term. One is colder than the other one. Okay, just as when we talk about pressure systems, we have a high pressure system and a low pressure system. All it means is that one is higher, even slightly higher, or by a substantial margin higher than the lower pressure system. Very similar kind of analogy there. Okay, what we've also got to consider is about the relative cold and the relative warmth of the atmosphere, but also the pressure differential and how fast is that movement, that cold front movement. If it's relatively slow, then you won't have this propulsion of the warm air ahead of the cold front up into the atmosphere. Okay, if it's as much, so you'll still get lots of clouds and possible rain and so on and so forth, but it won't be as severe. If you have a very fast moving cold front, then what will happen, that this warm air ahead of it will be pushed up into the atmosphere really quickly. You'll get lots of high rates of condensation, lots of vertical movement, movement, but also vertical development of clouds. So therefore you'll have the more severe weather associated with thunderstorms, cumulonimbus clouds, so on and so forth. You can also have higher winds associated with that as well. With thunderstorms as well, you've got to expect potential microbursts, localized downward bursts of wind, and also the larger water droplets as well. So there can be varying degrees of the effects of this cold front. Okay, it really depends on the speed of the movement. It also depends on how cold one air mass is, and also how warm another air mass is. You've got to also understand that with a warm air mass, the potential is that it has a greater moisture content. The humidity and the relative humidity of the air mass it will be able to retain more moisture. So more moisture being propelled up into the atmosphere with heat will create more condensation. Okay, so hopefully that explains what a cold front is, and there are lots of other variables involved, but essentially it is one colder air mass replacing a warmer air mass, and the boundary between the two, that is the cold front. Okay, thank you very much.